Little girl ran to the billionaire, crying, "They're beating my mama!" What the billionaire did. The downpour came without warning, heavy and unrelenting, washing the city in streaks of grey and gold. A black Bentley rolled slowly through the soaked streets, its tinted windows hiding the man inside. Nathaniel Cross, a name whispered with awe and envy across the country. Billionaire, philanthropist, untouchable. Yet tonight, even behind the glass, his eyes looked distant, cold reflections of someone who had everything, except the feeling of being alive. The rain pounded harder. Nathaniel's driver, Charles, glanced through the wipers. "Sir, do you want me to take the detour through Fifth Avenue?" Nathaniel didn't answer at first. His gaze was fixed on the world beyond the window, a blur of umbrellas, headlights, and faces running for shelter. "No," he finally said. "Keep going." His voice was low, smooth, and tired, the kind of tone that belonged to a man who had spoken too many orders and heard too few truths. Then, as the car slowed near an alley, something small moved through the curtain of rain. A little girl, drenched, shivering, her hair plastered to her face, ran straight into the middle of the street. Charles slammed the brakes and the tires screeched. Nathaniel's hand shot forward, steadying himself against the seat. The girl pressed her palms against the hood of the car, her eyes wide with terror, her lips trembling as she cried, "Please, please, help my mama. They're hurting her." For a second, no one moved. Then Nathaniel stepped out, ignoring Charles's protests. The rain soaked his tailored suit instantly, but he didn't seem to feel it. He crouched down, his voice calm but firm. "What did you say?" "They're beating my mama," she sobbed, pointing toward the narrow alley behind her. "Please, she didn't do anything." Nathaniel's pulse quickened, not from fear but from something he hadn't felt in years. Urgency. "Stay in the car," he told Charles, and without another word, he followed the child. The alley was dark, lit only by the flicker of a broken neon sign. 3 men stood over a woman, a waitress by the look of her uniform, her apron torn, her cheek bruised. She was shielding herself with one arm, while trying to protect the small bag she held in the other. Nathaniel's voice cut through the rain. "That's enough." The men turned, one sneered. "Mind your own business, old man." Nathaniel stepped closer, his posture too steady, his eyes too sharp to mistake. "Walk away," he said evenly. His voice was calm, the kind of calm that belonged to someone used to being obeyed. They didn't recognize him at first, but when one of them took a step forward, and the streetlight caught the glint of his platinum watch, that unmistakable symbol of wealth and power, they froze. "Nathaniel Cross?" one muttered. "Yes," he said simply. "Now leave." They hesitated, muttered curses under their breath, and disappeared into the rain. Nathaniel turned to the woman. She was still clutching her bag, her breathing ragged. Her hair was damp, her lip bleeding slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked up, startled by the man before her. For a moment she didn't answer. Then she said softly, I think so." He offered his hand. "You need a doctor." "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "My daughter, she's safe," he interrupted. "In my car." That made her eyes widen. She stumbled to her feet, ignoring the pain in her arm, and followed him toward the street. The girl ran to her. "Mama!" she cried, wrapping her tiny arms around the woman's waist. The woman knelt down, pressing her face against her daughter's hair. "It's all right, Emily, it's all right, baby." Nathaniel watched them quietly. Something about the way the woman held her child, as if she were holding her whole world, made something shift inside him. He hadn't seen love like that in years, maybe ever. The woman looked up again. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice trembling. "You didn't have to stop." He shook his head. No one else did. Their eyes met, his piercing and unreadable, hers full of warmth and exhaustion. "I'm Nathaniel," he said. "Clara," she replied softly. He glanced at her torn apron and bruised hands. "Where do you work?" "The Blue Orchid Cafe," she said. "I was walking home after closing. They wanted my tips." He nodded slowly. "Get in. I'll take you both home." Clara hesitated, pride flickering behind her gratitude. "You've already done enough." Nathaniel's expression didn't change. "Humor me." She hesitated again, then nodded. As they drove through the city lights, Emily leaned against her mother's arm, finally asleep. Nathaniel sat beside them, silent. The sound of rain on the car roof filled the space between words. Clara finally spoke. "You didn't have to get involved. People like you usually don't." He glanced at her. "People like me?" She met his gaze, her voice calm. "The ones who can choose not to see." He looked away, the words cutting deeper than he expected. "Maybe I've been one of them." The city lights blurred outside. He didn't know why he felt drawn to this woman. Maybe it was her courage, maybe the quiet dignity she carried even while broken. All he knew was that the silence in that car felt different. It wasn't empty. When they reached her apartment, Clara carried Emily inside. Nathaniel followed her to the door, the rain still falling softly behind him. "Thank you again," she said, smiling faintly. "I owe you." He shook his head. "You don't." She looked at him for a moment, as if trying to read the man behind the perfect suit. "Good night, Mr. Cross." He nodded. "Good night, Clara." As he turned to leave, Emily's sleepy voice came from the doorway. "Mommy, is he an angel?" Clara smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "Just a man who remembered how to care." But Nathaniel heard her, and for the first time in years, that word care felt like both a wound and a promise. Subscribe if you believe that love still changes people. Nathaniel couldn't sleep that night. He had spent decades learning how to shut the world out, to lock feelings behind boardroom walls, to bury emotions under contracts and profits. Yet somehow, that waitress and her daughter had slipped through his defenses as if they'd been meant to all along. He poured himself a drink and stood by the window of his penthouse. The city glowed beneath him. Lights, rain, motion, the illusion of life. But it all looked hollow. His reflection in the glass was that of a man who had everything and still couldn't feel the warmth of it. He thought about Clara, her eyes still shining with fear, but also with something unbreakable. That kind of strength couldn't be bought. And the girl, Emily, her voice trembling yet fearless as she ran into the rain to save her mother, that image refused to leave him. The next morning, Nathaniel arrived at his office as usual, dressed in a grey suit sharp enough to cut through the tension in the air. His assistant, Olivia, greeted him nervously. "Good morning, sir. You have a call with the board in 20 minutes and—" He interrupted. "Cancel it." She blinked. "Cancel it, sir." "Yes," he said flatly. "All of it. I need the morning to myself." It wasn't anger. It was clarity. Something in him was shifting, a slow, deliberate unraveling of habits that no longer fit. At noon, Nathaniel found himself driving through the lower district, a place he hadn't seen in years. His car didn't belong there, neither did he, but there it was. The Blue Orchid Cafe, small, modest, and tucked between an auto shop and a bakery. He entered quietly. The bell above the door chimed, and the scent of coffee and rain greeted him. Behind the counter, Clara froze for a moment before managing a polite smile. "Mr. Cross," she said softly, "did you get lost?" He almost smiled back. "I don't usually visit the same place twice," he admitted, "but I was in the neighborhood." She looked at him skeptically. "Billionaires don't just happen to be in this neighborhood. Maybe this one does," he replied. Her co-worker, Maria, eyed him curiously, then whispered to Clara, "That's him, isn't it, the man from the news? The one who owns half of downtown?" Clara gave her a look that said, "Not now." He noticed the bruising still faint on her arm. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "I've had worse days," she said lightly, pouring coffee into a cup. "You? Trying to have better ones." There was a quiet pause before she placed the cup in front of him. "On the house?" He frowned. "You shouldn't—" "I insist," she said, her tone firm but kind. "You've done enough." He accepted the cup, though he didn't drink right away. He just watched her, the way she moved with ease behind the counter, greeting customers, remembering their names, smiling as if the world hadn't tried to crush her the night before. It wasn't just kindness, it was grace. Later, as the cafe quieted, Clara came over to clear a nearby table. Nathaniel spoke again, his voice lower. "You're not afraid of me, are you?" She looked up, caught off guard. "Should I be?" He hesitated. "Most people are." She tilted her head. "Maybe that's because you expect them to be." Her answer landed heavier than he anticipated. He leaned back, studying her. "You don't talk to me like others do." "I don't talk to anyone like others do," she said, smiling faintly. "Life's too short for pretending." Her honesty was disarming. It was the opposite of what his world thrived on. He wanted to say something else, but a voice interrupted them, small, familiar, and full of joy. "Mr. Cross!" Emily ran into the cafe, her school bag bouncing behind her. She stopped in front of him, grinning. "You really came back." Nathaniel's heart did something unexpected. It softened. "It seems I did." Clara looked embarrassed. "Emily, say hello properly." Emily turned to him and gave a tiny curtsy. "Bonjour, monsieur." He blinked, surprised. "French?" Clara smiled. "Her school teaches it." "I like it," he said, smiling for real this time. "Très bien, mademoiselle." The girl giggled, then whispered to her mother, loud enough for him to hear, "He's not as scary as you said." Clara gave her a mock glare. "Emily," he chuckled. "She's right. I can be worse." Something about the way they all laughed together made the room feel warmer, the kind of warmth Nathaniel hadn't felt in years, maybe decades. When it was time to leave, Nathaniel stood near the door. "You should get better security," he said. "That neighborhood isn't safe." Clara nodded. "We'll manage. We always do." But there was worry in her tone, and he noticed. "You don't have to manage alone." She met his gaze evenly. "I've done it all my life." He nodded slowly. "Maybe it's time someone helped." "Why?" she asked, curious but cautious. "Because you feel guilty for having money." "No," he said quietly. "Because I finally met someone who deserves it." She didn't answer, not out of rudeness, but because her heart didn't quite know what to do with his words. As he stepped outside, the rain began again, soft and cleansing. He stood there for a moment, looking back through the glass. Clara was laughing with her daughter, her hair glinting under the cafe lights. He didn't know it yet, but that small cafe would soon become his reason to drive across the city again and again, not for business, but for something far more dangerous to a man like him, something real. And behind him, the wind carried Emily's voice, light as hope itself. "Mama, do you think he'll come back?" Clara smiled, though her heart was unsure. "Maybe," she whispered, "but people like him don't stay in places like this." What she didn't see, or what none of them did, was that Nathaniel had stopped walking. He stood still for a long time, staring at the faint reflection of their laughter in the glass, and for the first time in his life, he didn't want to leave. The next few days passed quietly for Clara, but not without weight. Every time the cafe bell rang, her heart hesitated, as if it half expected him. She hated that it did. Nathaniel Cross was a man from a world that didn't belong to hers, a world of suits, skyscrapers, and decisions made in rooms she'd never see. Yet something in the way he had looked at her, not as a waitress, not as someone fragile, but as someone seen, had stayed with her longer than she wanted to admit. It was Friday morning when it happened. The bell chimed again, the usual sound of routine, but this time the air shifted. He was there, standing in the doorway, hair still damp from the drizzle, wearing a navy coat over a dark vest, his presence as commanding as ever, yet softened somehow by something unseen. "You again," Clara said, trying to hide her surprise. "Is that a complaint?" "Depends," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Are you here for coffee or for conversation?" "Both," he said simply, moving to his usual seat near the window. She sighed, shaking her head with a faint smile. "You know, my customers don't usually come back 3 days in a row, especially the ones with drivers." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm trying to see what the other side of the city looks like." "You could have done that from your office window," she said, but her tone wasn't sharp. He looked around much at the cracked walls, the chipped mugs, the laughter between the regulars. "Doesn't look the same from above," he murmured. She poured his coffee, placed it before him, and leaned against the counter. "You know, people talk when someone like you keeps showing up here." "Let them," he said, stirring his cup. "They've talked all my life. It never changed anything." Clara folded her arms, studying him. "You don't strike me as someone who does things without a reason." He looked up at her then, the faintest smile curving his lips. "Maybe I just needed to see a place where people still say good morning and mean it." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain outside softened into mist, painting the windows in silver streaks. "Fine," she said, breaking the silence. "But if you're staying, you're paying." He nodded. "Deal." That afternoon, the cafe filled with chatter. A group of workers came in from the rain, laughing, shaking off water from their jackets. Among them, one of the men recognized Nathaniel. "Hey, you're that guy from TV, right? The billionaire?" Nathaniel froze for a second, the familiar tension rising. But before he could answer, Clara stepped in, her voice firm. "He's just a customer like everyone else." The man grinned awkwardly and backed off. Nathaniel glanced at her, gratitude flickering in his eyes. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," she said. "You looked like you were about to disappear." He tilted his head. "Maybe I was." She smiled faintly. "Then I guess I ruined your escape plan." "You've been doing that since the night I met you," he said almost to himself. Her eyes softened, but before she could answer, Emily came running in after school, rain boots splashing through puddles. "Mr. Cross!" she exclaimed, rushing toward him. "Miss Emily," he said warmly, kneeling to her height. "How was school today?" She grinned. "We had art class. I drew my mama." He smiled. "Can I see?" Emily proudly showed him a crayon drawing. Uneven lines, a stick figure with big brown eyes and a red apron. "That's her," she said. He nodded, impressed. "You're quite the artist." Clara laughed softly. "You should see her version of me on laundry day." Emily giggled, and Nathaniel found himself laughing too, a sound so rare it startled even him. As the evening light dimmed, he stayed longer than usual, talking with them, listening to stories that had nothing to do with money or mergers. And as he watched Clara helping a regular count his change, he realized that this small cafe was more alive than any ballroom he had ever stood in. That night, as he returned to his penthouse, the silence felt heavier. He poured himself another drink, but didn't touch it. Instead, he opened his laptop and searched Blue Orchid Cafe donations. The page was bare. No investors, no sponsorships, no charity listings, just a small business struggling to survive. The next morning, a discreet envelope arrived at Clara's door. Inside was a note, handwritten in neat, deliberate script, for repairs and safety improvements. No name required, and beneath it, a check. She stared at it for a long time before tearing it in half. Then she called him. When Nathaniel arrived at the cafe that evening, she was waiting for him outside, holding the torn check. "Was this supposed to make me grateful?" she asked, her voice steady. "It was supposed to make things easier." "For who?" she challenged. "For you, so you could feel like a hero." His jaw tightened. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" He hesitated, his voice softening. "It's what I know how to do." She stared at him. The billionaire who could command the world now looking like a boy caught between guilt and sincerity. "You think money fixes everything," she said quietly. "But sometimes it just proves you weren't listening." Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. "I wasn't trying to buy your gratitude," he said finally. "I was trying to give something back." "Then give me your time," she said. "Not your money." He blinked. "My time." "Yes. Come here tomorrow morning at 6. Help me serve breakfast. Help me see if you can actually care about something without writing a check." He looked at her, half in disbelief, half in awe. "You're serious?" "Completely," she said. "If you show up, maybe I'll start believing you're not just another man trying to feel good about himself." And then she turned and walked inside, leaving him standing in the glow of the streetlight, rain beginning to fall again. Nathaniel looked down at the torn check in his hand, the fragments of a habit he had just been told to unlearn. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what to do with his wealth, but he knew exactly where he'd be at 6 in the morning. The sun hadn't yet risen when Nathaniel Cross stood outside the Blue Orchid Cafe. The streets were silent except for the soft hum of early buses and the hiss of rain evaporating from the asphalt. He wore no suit today, just a simple grey sweater and rolled sleeves, his usual polish replaced by something human. The doorman at his penthouse had looked confused when he left without a driver, but Nathaniel didn't care. He checked his watch. 5:57 a.m. At exactly 6, the cafe door opened. Clara stepped out, surprised but not shocked to see him there. "You actually came," she said, half smiling. "I said I would. You don't strike me as a man used to taking orders." "Maybe that's why I need to learn." She held the door open. "Then come in, Mr. Cross. Welcome to the other side of the counter." Inside, the cafe was quiet, the air still carrying the faint sweetness of yesterday's pastries. The tables were empty, the world outside still waking up. Clara handed him a rag and pointed toward the chairs. "Start by wiping those down. Customers notice when things shine." He took the cloth awkwardly, as if she'd handed him a foreign object. "Do I at least get an employee orientation?" "This is your orientation," she said, already filling the coffee urn. He chuckled softly. "Efficient. You learn fast or drown," she replied. He began cleaning, the movements clumsy at first, but steadying as the minutes passed. The billionaire who once negotiated deals worth billions now fought a losing battle against a stubborn coffee stain. By the third table, Clara noticed the small smirk on his face. "Something funny?" she asked. "I just realized," he said, "you've got more control over me than most of my board members." "That's because your board doesn't know how to handle a sponge," she said without looking up. He laughed, a quiet, genuine sound that seemed to warm the room. By the time the first customer arrived, the cafe looked brighter than usual. Nathaniel was behind the counter, pouring coffee. Clara caught the skeptical look on the old man's face when he noticed the stranger serving him. "New staff?" the man asked. "Temporary help," Clara said with a grin. Nathaniel extended the cup. "Black, no sugar, right?" The old man blinked, impressed. "How do you know?" "I read people," Nathaniel said. The man took the cup, muttering, "You should keep this one, Clara. He's better than the last kid." As the morning went on, Nathaniel learned to navigate the rhythm of the cafe. The rush, the noise, the small exchanges that made strangers feel known. Each thank you from a customer felt strangely grounding, more real than applause in a ballroom ever had. At one point, he accidentally dropped a plate, the crash echoing through the cafe. Clara laughed, shaking her head. "You just lost your first day's pay." He smiled. "Then I'll work overtime." Her laughter faded into something gentler. "You're really trying, aren't you?" He looked up, meeting her eyes. For the first time in a long time, yes. By noon, when the lunch crowd died down, Clara finally sat beside him at the counter. Emily had come in after school, proudly announcing that her mother's new assistant was the talk of the block. "You made quite the impression," Clara said. "Old Mrs. Green tipped double today just because you said 'have a nice day' like you meant it." "I did mean it," he said. "Turns out kindness isn't bad for business." "Now you're learning," she teased. He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me something, Clara. Why do you still do this? The long hours, the stress, the pay that barely covers rent?" She thought for a moment before answering. "Because it matters. Because every person who walks through that door deserves to be treated like they belong somewhere. And because my daughter thinks this place smells like happiness." He smiled faintly. "It does. Like coffee and courage." She laughed softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," he said. "The highest one I know how to give." For a long moment their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't flirtation, it was recognition. Two people from different worlds realizing that, for once, they were standing on the same ground. That evening, as they closed up, Clara handed him a towel to dry the cups. "You survived your first day." "Barely," he said, grinning. "I think one of your regulars threatened to adopt me." "That's Mrs. Clark. She does that when she likes someone." He dried the last cup and set it down. "So, does this mean I passed the test?" She tilted her head. "That depends. Did you learn anything?" He thought for a moment. "That people will forgive your mistakes if you serve them with sincerity." "Not bad," she said. "But there's more. Tell me." "That sometimes showing up is enough." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. "Then I'll keep showing up." She raised an eyebrow. "Careful. I might start believing you. Then I'll have to make sure you do." As he stepped outside into the evening air, the sky had turned gold, streaked with violet clouds. Clara watched him from the doorway, arms crossed, unsure what to make of him. A man who had lived among skyscrapers now wiping tables like he belonged to this small, imperfect world. When Emily tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Mama, is he coming back tomorrow?" Clara hesitated before answering. "I don't know, honey," she said softly, "but I think he's finally learning why he should." And as Nathaniel walked down the street, the last rays of light glinting off the puddles, he realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't dreading tomorrow. He was already waiting for it. The next morning, Clara opened the cafe before sunrise as usual. She didn't expect him to come back. Billionaires didn't do repetition. They collected moments the way they collected art, then moved on. But when she heard the soft jingle of the bell and saw him walk in, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly disheveled, carrying 2 steaming cups from the bakery down the street, she smiled despite herself. "You're early," she said, trying not to sound pleased. He placed one of the cups on the counter. "You said yesterday that my coffee was terrible. I decided to outsource it." She raised an eyebrow. "Is this a bribe?" "Consider it a peace offering." "Then peace accepted," she said, taking the cup. He leaned on the counter, looking around. "It's strange," he said. "I've spent years in rooms full of people pretending to be alive, and this place, it's the first that feels real." "That's because nobody here can afford to fake it," she replied. He nodded. "Maybe that's what I've been missing." Before she could respond, the morning rush began. Familiar faces, working hands, hurried footsteps. Nathaniel joined her behind the counter again, moving more naturally this time. He smiled when a customer complimented his improvement, and even Emily, who came in before school, whispered proudly, "You're almost like Mama now." He laughed. "That's the best compliment I've had all week." By mid-morning, the cafe was full, not just of people, but of energy. The smell of coffee and toasted bread mingled with laughter and stories. Nathaniel found himself immersed in conversations that had nothing to do with business. A construction worker told him about his daughter's scholarship. An old teacher shared her worries about rent. Every story cracked something open inside him, pieces of empathy he didn't know he still had. When the rush died down, Clara brought him water and leaned against the counter beside him. "So, what's the verdict, Mr. Cross? Is the common life treating you well?" He smiled faintly. "It's exhausting, and messy, and unpredictable, and He looked at her. "And I think I like it." She chuckled. "Careful, you'll ruin your reputation." "I think it's already beyond repair," he said quietly. Her laughter faded. There was something in his tone, an honesty too heavy for jokes. "You mean because of us?" she asked softly. He turned toward her, surprised. "Is there an us?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I meant the cafe. You helping here. The gossip." He exhaled, relieved, but unsure why. "Ah, that." She tilted her head. "What did you think I meant?" He didn't answer right away. "Nothing I can say without sounding foolish." Her eyes softened, curiosity flickering in them, but before she could ask more, a customer waved her over. Later that day, a sleek black car stopped outside the cafe. A woman stepped out, tall, impeccably dressed, sharp as glass. Elise Martin, Nathaniel's longtime business partner and the face of his empire's public order. Clara looked up as the door opened. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Mr. Cross," Elise said, her eyes sweeping the small cafe like it offended her. Nathaniel emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a towel. "Elise," he said calmly, "what brings you here?" She stared at him. "I could ask you the same thing. Do you realize what you're doing to yourself? To your name?" He took a breath. "Maybe I've been living under a name too long. I'm trying to live as a person again." Her expression hardened. "This isn't some redemption story, Nathaniel. This woman—" "Her name is Clara," he interrupted sharply. Elise blinked, caught off guard by the firmness in his tone. He continued, quieter now. "She's not a headline, and she's not yours to insult." Clara stepped forward. "It's all right," she said softly. But Nathaniel shook his head. "No, it isn't." Elise looked between them, realization dawning. "You're serious," she whispered. "You're really letting this cafe, this woman pull you down?" "I'm not falling," he said. "I'm finally standing somewhere solid." Elise exhaled sharply. "You're destroying everything we built." "Then maybe it wasn't worth what it cost," he said simply. Clara turned away, her heart tightening. She didn't want to be the reason for the rift she was hearing in his voice. After Elise left, Nathaniel stood by the window for a long time. Clara approached him quietly. "So you didn't have to defend me like that." "Yes, I did," he said, "because I wasn't just defending you. I was defending the part of myself that's been dead for years." She looked at him for a long time before saying softly, "You don't owe me anything, Nathaniel." "I know," he said. "That's why I keep coming back." The cafe fell silent again, just the hum of the refrigerator, the faint clatter of dishes and the quiet tension between two people who didn't know how to fit their worlds together but couldn't stop trying. That evening, when they closed, Clara found a folded note by the counter. In his handwriting it said, "You reminded me what it means to belong somewhere that isn't built on power. Tomorrow, I'll still be here, if you'll have me." She folded the note and tucked it into her pocket, her fingers trembling. When Emily came out of the back room and asked, "Mama, why are you smiling like that?" Clara just whispered, "No reason, sweetheart." But deep down, she knew it was the first time in years she'd smiled because she wanted to, not because she had to. And outside, under the flickering streetlight, Nathaniel lingered longer than he needed to, staring at the cafe's dimly lit window, not at the place but at the people inside. The two worlds he once thought could never meet were already beginning to blur. The next morning came with a soft drizzle and the faint scent of earth after rain. Nathaniel arrived early again, this time with a paper bag of croissants and an awkward grin that almost looked boyish. Clara was mopping the floor when she saw him through the glass door. She didn't need to ask why he was there. She only said, "You're getting predictable, Mr. Cross." He smiled. "You make it sound like that's a bad thing." "It is for a man who thrives on surprises," she teased. He handed her the bag. "Then consider this my rebellion." When she opened it, she laughed softly. "You bought half the bakery." "I wasn't sure which one you liked," he said. "So I guessed." "You guessed wrong," she said, pretending to frown. "But I appreciate the effort." He laughed quietly. "I'll learn." Their small exchanges had become like breathing, natural, easy, layered with meanings neither dared to say aloud. But beneath the laughter, something else had started to stir, something fragile, dangerous, and undeniable. By noon, the cafe buzzed with its usual rhythm. Nathaniel helped serve tables, while Clara handled the register. They moved together with surprising synchronicity, like they'd been doing this for years. Emily sat at her corner table drawing, occasionally lifting her head to giggle at something they said. At one point, an elderly woman who frequented the cafe smiled at them and whispered, "You two make quite the pair." Clara froze, the words landing heavier than intended. Nathaniel looked up at her, eyes soft but unreadable. When the woman left, Clara pretended to rearrange napkins, but her hands trembled slightly. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said too quickly. He hesitated. "You don't have to run from what people think." "I'm not running," she replied, keeping her voice calm. "I just know how stories like this end." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then maybe we write a different one." She looked up at him, heart beating faster. "You don't understand. People like you don't stay." He frowned slightly. "People like me. Men with names in the papers," she said softly. "Men who have everything to lose." He took a slow breath. "Maybe that's exactly why I should stay." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to quiet. There was no sound, no coffee machines, no laughter, no clatter of cups, just two souls realizing they were already too close to turn back. That evening, Nathaniel offered to walk Clara and Emily home. The rain had stopped, but the street still glistened under the glow of streetlights. Emily skipped ahead, humming, while Clara carried the day's tips in a small envelope. "You really don't have to walk us," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I want to. You're going to ruin your shoes. I can buy more." "Not everything can be replaced, Nathaniel." He smiled faintly. "I'm starting to understand that." When they reached her small apartment building, Emily ran up the steps ahead. Nathaniel lingered by the gate, his hands in his pockets. "Thank you," she said softly, "for today, for everything." "I should be the one thanking you," he said. "You've given me something I didn't know I was missing." She tilted her head. "What's that?" "Peace," he said simply. Her heart caught in her chest. "That's a dangerous word for a man like you." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Then maybe I'm tired of danger. That doesn't mean anything." Before she could respond, Emily called from the door. "Mama, come on." Clara turned back to him. "Good night, Nathaniel." He smiled softly. "Good night, Clara." She went inside, closing the door gently. But as she leaned against it, her heart refused to calm. The next day, the cafe was quieter than usual. Word had spread: the billionaire and the waitress. Some came out of curiosity, others out of judgment. Whispers floated through the tables like smoke. Clara tried to ignore them, but when one woman muttered loud enough for her to hear, "He's just playing with her. Men like that always do." Something inside her broke. Nathaniel saw her expression and set down the cup he was holding. He walked straight to the table, his tone calm but cutting. "If you have something to say it to me." The woman flushed. "I didn't mean—" "You did," he interrupted, his voice steady but cold. "And you're wrong." The cafe fell silent. Clara watched, torn between gratitude and fear. After the woman left, she turned to him. "You can't do that," she said. "I won't let them disrespect you." "This isn't your world to fix, Nathaniel," she said quietly. "And if you keep fighting it, you'll lose everything." He stepped closer. "Then maybe everything I had was never real." Her eyes glistened, the weight of his words too much to bear. "You don't mean that." "I do," he said, "and I think I've meant it for a long time." He walked out then, the door chime ringing like an echo of something irreversible. Clara stood there, heart pounding, surrounded by silence and the faint smell of spilled coffee. She didn't know if what she felt was fear or the first fragile proof that he truly cared. 2 days passed before Clara saw him again. The cafe felt colder without him, as if his presence had somehow warmed the air. She worked silently, refusing to look at the door even when it opened. Part of her hoping he'd walk through, part of her praying he wouldn't. Emily noticed. "Mama," she said quietly. "You're sad." Clara smiled faintly. "Just tired, sweetheart." But the truth was heavier. She'd spent her nights replaying his words. "Then maybe everything I had was never real." They echoed in her mind, a confession wrapped in pain. She wanted to believe him, but she also knew what men like him carried, a world built on walls, power, and pride. On the third evening, as the rain began to pour again, she was locking up when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, and there he was, soaked, standing in the dim light of the street lamp. "You'll catch pneumonia," she said, startled. He didn't move closer. "I had to see you." Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because I made a mess," he said. "And I can't stop thinking about how you looked when I left." She hesitated, then stepped forward. "Nathaniel, you can't keep doing this. You walk into my world like it's something to explore, but you have another life, another reality waiting for you." He shook his head. "That life doesn't fit anymore." "Then what are you going to do?" she asked quietly. "Throw it away? For what?" He took another step forward. "For peace, for truth, for you." Her heart twisted. "You don't know what you're saying." He smiled faintly, rain running down his face. I've never been more sure of anything. She looked at him for a long moment, then opened the cafe door again. Come inside. You're dripping all over my sidewalk. He followed her in silently, and for a moment they just stood there listening to the sound of rain hitting the windows. She handed him a towel. You really don't care what people will say? I used to, he said, drying his hair. I used to care about headlines, about reputation, about staying untouchable. But you made me realize that being untouchable also means being unloved. Her eyes softened. Nathaniel, I'm not asking for your pity, he said quickly. Just your honesty. Tell me if I'm crossing a line. Tell me to walk away and I will. She stared at him, at the man who once lived behind glass walls and now stood trembling in her cafe like a boy lost in a storm. Finally, she whispered, You're not crossing a line. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he smiled. Small, fragile, the kind of smile that carries years of weight behind it. They sat together in the quiet, a single candle flickering on the counter. He told her things he'd never told anyone, about the emptiness behind his success, the loneliness hidden beneath luxury. She listened, her hands folded, her expression open and calm. When he paused, she said softly, Maybe you've been searching for love in places that sell everything but it. He looked at her, voice low. And maybe you've been giving it away without asking anything in return. She didn't answer. The truth in his words felt too real. Emily's drawing hung on the corkboard behind them, a crayon sketch of her, her mother, and a tall man in a suit. Underneath it, in childish handwriting, she'd written, Family. Nathaniel saw it and smiled. She drew me, he said softly. Clara turned, her heart sinking. I didn't even notice. She already sees me as part of your world, he murmured. Maybe she's wiser than both of us. Clara looked down. Children see what they want to see, or maybe they see what we're too afraid to admit. Silence settled again. Not awkward, but heavy with unspoken understanding. Finally, she stood up. You should go. It's late. He nodded, though he didn't move. Clara, if I asked you to let me stay, not here, but in your life, and would you? She froze, every muscle tense. Nathaniel, you can't mean that. I do, he said quietly. I'm done pretending. I'm done living a life that doesn't belong to me. Her voice broke slightly. You don't know what you're asking. My life isn't clean. It's hard. It's small. He stepped closer. Then maybe that's what makes it real. Her eyes filled with tears. I can't let you ruin yourself for me. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Maybe you're the only thing that could save me. For a long moment, they just stood there. The billionaire and the waitress, the rain whispering against the glass, the candlelight catching the space between them. Then she stepped back, shaking her head gently. I need time. He nodded slowly, eyes steady on hers. I'll give you that, but I'm not going anywhere. When he left, Clara locked the door and pressed her back against it, trembling. Outside, Nathaniel stood in the rain again, but this time, he didn't feel cold, because for the first time in years, hope burned warm inside him. The days that followed tested them both. Nathaniel didn't come to the cafe for nearly a week, but his absence hung in the air like a whisper. Customers still gossiped, some out of curiosity, others out of envy. Clara pretended not to hear, but every word weighed on her like invisible stones. She knew she had invited quiet chaos into her life the moment she let him in. One night, after closing, she found an envelope slipped under the cafe door. No name, just her own written in Nathaniel's careful handwriting. Inside was a check, large enough to clear her debts, buy new equipment, even secure Emily's schooling for years. But beneath it, there was also a note. I know you'll hate me for this. So I'm not trying to buy you. I'm trying to free you from what keeps you afraid to dream. N. She stared at it for a long time before tearing the check clean in half. Then she sat down behind the counter and cried, not because she was angry, but because she understood what it meant. He didn't want to own her. He wanted her to stand beside him, unbound. Across town, Nathaniel sat in his penthouse, surrounded by the silence of glass and steel. Elise, his business partner, stood near the window, watching him with growing frustration. Do you even realize what you're doing? She said. Your board is nervous. Your investors are questioning your judgment, and you're throwing everything away for a woman who serves coffee. He looked up from his drink, calm but tired. You don't understand her. No, Elise said sharply. I understand you. You've spent years building a world where no one could touch you, and now you're burning it down because someone finally did. Nathaniel set his glass down and met her gaze. Then maybe it's about time. Elise sighed, almost pitying him. She'll leave, Nathaniel. They always do. People like her don't survive in our world. He smiled faintly. Maybe I'm the one who doesn't belong in mine anymore. For the first time in their long partnership, Elise had no answer. She only turned toward the city lights and whispered, "Then you'd better be right about her." That weekend, Clara was closing the cafe when a familiar car pulled up outside. Nathaniel stepped out, dressed simply this time. No tailored suit, no armor of wealth. Just a man carrying the weight of a decision. She opened the door before he could knock. "I told you not to come." "I know," he said quietly, "but I needed to." "You think money can fix what's broken?" she asked, voice trembling. "Because it can't." "I wasn't trying to fix you," he said. "I was trying to give you a choice." She looked away. "I already made mine." "Then at least tell me why," he said, stepping closer. She met his eyes. "Because I can't stand in a life built on someone else's guilt." He froze. "That's not what this is." "Yes, it is," she said softly. "You're trying to make up for everything you've lost. Your peace, your purpose, and you think you found redemption in me. But I'm not your salvation, Nathaniel. I'm just me." Her words hit harder than he expected. For a moment, all he could do was stare at her, the truth unraveling inside him. Finally, he whispered, "You think I came here to be saved. I think you came here because you forgot what love looks like." The silence that followed was raw. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the city. He took a deep breath. "You're right," he said. "I forgot, until you reminded me." She closed her eyes, tears threatening. "Then remember me kindly, that's all I ask." He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "Don't," she said, her voice breaking. "If you touch me right now, I'll never let you go." He stood still, pain flickering in his eyes. "Then don't let go." But she did. When he finally walked out, she locked the door behind him and leaned against it, heart pounding, tears falling freely. The next morning, Emily noticed her mother's silence. "Mama, did you and Mr. Cross fight?" Clara smiled faintly. "Sometimes grown-ups don't see things the same way." "But you still like him," Emily said innocently. Clara's voice softened. "Yes, sweetheart, I do." "Then you should tell him. Life doesn't work that simply." Emily thought for a moment. Maybe it does, and grown-ups just make it harder. Clara laughed through her tears. "You're too wise for your age." The child shrugged. "Mr. Cross makes you smile. You don't smile like that for anyone else." Those words stayed with her all day. That evening, Clara left the cafe and walked through the rain, not toward home, but toward the skyscraper that bore his name. She'd sworn she wouldn't go back, but something inside her needed to end this with truth, not silence. The lobby guards recognized her instantly and exchanged glances, but didn't stop her. When the elevator doors opened to the top floor, she stepped out, trembling. Nathaniel stood by the window, staring at the city below. He didn't turn as she entered. "I thought you'd never come," he said softly. "I shouldn't have," she replied, "but I needed to say this." He turned then, weary, hopeful. "I don't want your money," she said. "I don't want your guilt. I just want you to stop running from yourself." He studied her for a long time, then said, "What if I'm not running anymore? What if I've already stopped, right here with you?" Her chest tightened. "Then you'll have to prove it. Not to me, to yourself." She walked toward the elevator, pausing just before the doors closed. "When you figure out who you are without the empire, without the armor, you'll know where to find me." The doors slid shut, leaving him alone in the reflection of his own empire. A man stripped of excuses, facing the cost of truth, and for the first time he didn't look powerful, he looked real. A month passed. The cafe found its rhythm again, but Clara hadn't. She worked, smiled, laughed with regulars, but inside she was waiting for the sound of the bell, the deep voice calling her name, the man who had taught her how fragile and beautiful real connection could be. Nathaniel had vanished from the tabloids. No sightings, no press releases, no public appearances. Some said he had left the country. Others said he'd sold everything. But Clara didn't believe rumors. She believed silence, and his had meaning. Emily noticed her mother's restlessness. "Mama," she said one morning, "if you miss him, why don't you call?" "Because sometimes," Clara replied softly, "the best thing you can do for someone is give them space to grow." "But what if he's scared too?" Clara smiled faintly. "Then I hope he finds courage before it's too late." Miles away, Nathaniel stood in an open field on the outskirts of the city, wearing jeans and boots instead of his usual armor of silk and steel. The land was quiet, untouched. The old farmhouse in the distance was his grandfather's, the place where he'd first learned the meaning of work before money made his hands soft. He'd come there to think, to rebuild, He'd walked away from his company board, sold the penthouse, and donated millions quietly to rebuild local schools and fund shelters. For the first time, the world owed him nothing, and it felt right. Elise visited once, standing at the gate in disbelief. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" He smiled, faint lines softening his face. "I've never been more serious," she sighed. "You gave up an empire for a woman." "No," he said. "I gave it up for myself, but she's the reason I realized I needed to." Elise shook her head. "You've changed, Nathaniel." He looked past her toward the horizon. That was the point. One crisp afternoon, he drove back into town. His car was old, borrowed, a far cry from the sleek luxury he once owned. He stopped a few blocks from the cafe, unsure if he had the right to walk in again. Through the glass, he saw Clara wiping tables, while Emily drew on napkins near the counter. For a long moment, he stood there, watching quietly, the way one watches something sacred. Then the doorbell rang and Clara looked up. Her eyes widened as if the world had stopped spinning for a heartbeat. She froze mid-step, disbelief and relief crashing together in her chest. He stood in the doorway. Simple clothes, no pretense, no armor, just him. "Do I need a reservation?" he asked softly. She blinked, breathless. "You're here. I promised I'd come back when I figured out who I was," he said. "Took me longer than I thought." Her voice trembled. "And who are you now?" He smiled faintly. "A man who finally understands that the size of his heart matters more than the size of his fortune." The cafe was quiet. A few customers looked up, sensing something extraordinary unfolding. Emily jumped down from her stool and ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "You came back," she said. He knelt, hugging her tightly. "I told your mom I would." When he stood again, Clara was still frozen behind the counter. "Why?" she whispered. "After everything?" "Because I stopped trying to build a life that looked perfect," he said. "I want one that feels real. And every version of real I've ever known begins with you." Her eyes glistened. "You don't even have a company anymore. Then maybe I'll learn to make coffee," he said, smiling. "If you'll have me." The corners of her lips trembled. "You'd hate it." "Maybe," he said, "but I'd hate living without you even more." The silence between them cracked, and something raw, beautiful, and long denied rushed in. She walked around the counter, stopping just in front of him. "You really mean it?" He nodded slowly. "Everything. No conditions, no walls." And then, after months of restraint, of silence and longing, Clara finally stepped into his arms. It wasn't the dramatic kiss of movies. It was quiet, trembling, full of tears and laughter. The kind that feels like coming home. When they pulled apart, Emily giggled. "Does this mean you're staying, Mr. Cross?" He looked at Clara, smiling softly. "If your mom says yes." Clara laughed through tears. "I think she just did." The cafe erupted in applause, regulars cheering, cups clinking. For once, the gossip didn't sting. It sang. Nathaniel exhaled, looking around. "I don't deserve this," he murmured. Clara touched his face gently. "You don't have to. You just have to choose it." He leaned into her touch, his voice quiet but steady. "Then I choose you. Today, tomorrow, for as long as you'll let me." And for the first time since he could remember, he didn't feel like a billionaire or a broken man. He just felt alive. Outside, the rain began to fall again. Soft, cleansing, endless. Like a promise that some stories, once broken, are meant to be rebuilt stronger than before. But neither of them noticed. They were too lost in each other's gaze, too full of the fragile certainty that love, real love, had finally found them. Spring came quietly that year, and with it the slow rebirth of everything they had both lost. The cafe, once struggling to stay afloat, had become a small haven in the heart of the city, not because of its coffee, but because of the story people whispered about it. The billionaire who walked away from the empire for love, the waitress who taught him how to live again. Nathaniel never tried to correct the stories. He didn't care about what people said anymore. He just smiled every time Clara teased him about how badly he still frothed milk, or how he burned toast almost daily. "You're hopeless," she said one morning, as he inspected his latest attempt at latte art. "Hopelessly in love, maybe," he said, smirking. She rolled her eyes. "That line would have worked better if you hadn't just poured coffee on the counter." "Details," he said, leaning closer. "You care about them too much? And you not enough," she replied, laughing. The warmth between them had shifted from hesitation to familiarity. There were still struggles, bills to pay, days when exhaustion overtook them both. But now, there was no loneliness between their silences. There was partnership, the kind that grows not from perfection but from persistence. One evening, Clara stood at the door as the sun sank behind the city skyline. Nathaniel came up behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. "You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't walked into this place that day?" he asked. She smiled softly. "You would have kept walking past, and I would have kept thinking men like you only existed in newspapers." He kissed her temple. "I almost did keep walking. You know what stopped me?" She turned to face him. "What?" He smiled faintly. "You smiled when I didn't deserve it. That's what stopped me." Her eyes softened. "I don't think love ever waits for us to deserve it." He looked at her then, really looked, as if trying to memorize the face that had redefined everything he once believed about worth. "You saved me, Clara." She shook her head. "No, Nathaniel. You just finally let yourself be found." They stood in silence for a moment, the golden light painting them both in warmth. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The world you left?" He thought about it for a long time. "Sometimes," he said, "but only the illusion of control, not the emptiness that came with it. I used to think money could buy time, peace, happiness, but all it really bought was distance. You can't touch life through glass." "And now?" she asked. He smiled. "Now, I wake up every morning and watch the sun hit your face. That's more wealth than I ever earned in boardrooms." Clara laughed softly, tears glimmering. "You've become very poetic lately." He grinned. "Blame the company I keep." A few months later, something extraordinary happened. Not a grand event, not a public declaration, but a simple afternoon that changed everything. Emily had been accepted into a prestigious art program, her drawings now hanging proudly on the cafe walls. Nathaniel watched her show customers her sketches with unfiltered joy, and for the first time, he understood what real legacy meant. After the cafe closed that evening, he asked Clara to meet him outside. The city lights shimmered against the wet pavement, and a soft breeze carried the scent of rain. She stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. "You look serious," she said. "I am," he replied, holding something small in his hand. When he opened it, she gasped, not because of the ring's value, but because it wasn't extravagant. It was simple, elegant, and clearly chosen with care. "Nathaniel," she whispered. He took her hand. "This isn't about promises written on paper. It's about the life we're already living. I don't want to build a future that forgets where it started. Right here with you in this cafe, with spilled coffee and second chances." Tears welled in her eyes. "You really think we can make it work forever?" He smiled. "We already are." She laughed through her tears. "Then yes, Nathaniel. 1,000 times yes." Emily burst through the door, just in time to see him slip the ring onto her mother's finger. "Are you getting married?" she squealed. Nathaniel crouched down. "Only if you agree to be my assistant in everything. Only if I get free cake forever," she said, giggling. He laughed. "Deal." Clara covered her face, laughing through tears, and when she looked at him again, she saw not the billionaire the world once whispered about, but the man who had learned how to live, how to love, and how to stay. Years later, their cafe had expanded into something more. Not a franchise, but a gathering place known for its warmth, for the way people walked in heavy and left lighter. Travelers would sometimes stop by, pointing at the photo of a younger Nathaniel and Clara behind the counter. "Is that the story everyone talks about?" they'd ask, and Clara would smile, pouring another cup of coffee. "It's not a story," she'd say. "It's a reminder that love doesn't need permission and redemption doesn't ask for applause." Nathaniel would glance at her from across the room, their eyes meeting in quiet understanding, because they both knew their love hadn't been about a rescue or a miracle or even fate. It had been about choice, choosing to stay when it was hard, choosing to believe when it hurt, choosing to love beyond pride, beyond fear, beyond money. The kind of love that remade two broken people into something whole. And as they closed the cafe that night hand in hand, Nathaniel looked at her and whispered, "You're still the only home I've ever needed." She smiled softly. "And you're the only one who ever truly saw me." Outside, the rain began again, gentle, eternal, and full of grace. Subscribe if you believe love still changes people.